Hello, my name is Ashley Lubke, and I am a student in SPCE 683, Section 804 with Dr. Mugdal. Today is Wednesday, April 16th, 2025, and I will now adjust my camera so that you can watch me shuffle the cards. One, two, three, and I will cut the deck in half. Bring the camera back up. I have set a timer on my phone for 1 minute. Once I start the timer, I will begin reading the terms. Change a contingency of reinforcement by gradually increasing the response ratio of the extent of the interval. Schedule thinning. Embrace the participants' values, expectations, traditions, and ideas. Match. The difference between the cost of treatment or intervention and the projected benefits, cost-benefit ratio. Reinforcement that requires the involvement of others, socially mediated reinforcement. Statements describing corrective disciplinary and revocation actions depending on the circumstances for providing if a professional standards, disciplinary standards. Vertical lines drawn upward from the horizontal axis to show points in time at which changes in independent variables occurred. Condition change label. Adhere to documentation expectations, participates in observations or rehearsals, responds professionally to feedback, meet performance expectations, seek clarification, provide supervisor with performance supervisee expectations. All right, I will set these cards aside and I will continue reading. Brief descriptions of the dimensions represented along each axis label. Voluntary credential issued by a private organization authorized by members of the profession, not the government. Professional certification. Stimulus change that follows the behavior of entrance consequence. Antecedent intervention that provides non-access. A two-dimensional graph with a logarithmic scaled y-axis so that equal distances on the vertical axis represent changes in behavior. Semi-logarithmic charts. Inadequate professional repertoire, difficulty problem solving and database decision making, inadequate supervisory repertoire, unethical behavior. Negative outcomes associated with lack of evidence-based supervision. Allocations of responses to choices available on concurrent schedules of reinforcement. Rates of responding across choices are distributed in proportions that match the rates of reinforcement received for each alternative. Matching law. Written guidelines that provide direction for conducting practices associated with an organized profession. Professional standards. Punishment that requires the involvement of others. Socially mediated punishment. Teach behaviors to occur with consequences which are likely to happen in the natural environment. Introduce natural maintaining contingency. A procedure in which a person compares her performance of a target behavior with a created goal or standard, often a component of self-management, self-evaluation. Describes the behavior of images or sounds without social mediation. A stimulus change that functions as a increases the frequency of behavior that it precedes as a result of evolutionary development. It does not rely on previous learning history. Primary unconditioned punishers. A schedule of reinforcement in which the response requirements of two or more basic schedules must be met in a specific sequence before reinforcement is delivered. Concurrent chain schedule. Schedule of reinforcement in which reinforcement is contingent on a response being different in some specified way from previous response. Lag reinforcement. Prior to preference assessment, potential tangibles that could act to increase future occurrences of behavior. Potential reinforcers. Describes communication through speech, vocal, verbal. occurs when the most salient component of compound stimulus responding and interferes with the acquisition of stimulus control by the more relevant stimulant overshadowing. Covert events typically accessible only to the person experiencing them. Private events designed to evoke a specific imitative response and may include teaching a child to say a word, brush his teeth, or paint a picture. Planned models. A schedule of reinforcement in which two or more contingents of reinforcement operate independently and simultaneously for two or more behaviors. Concurrent schedule might include a child learning curse words from peers or how to sing a song on the radio. Unplanned model provides physical assistance as needed by having the instructor remain close to the learner and provide more restrictive prompting only when the learner is not responding correctly. Used for skills which require physical assistance activities of daily living. Graduated guidance. Teach behaviors in all settings. Sequential modification. An emotional reaction of anger or frustration, including operant behavior which injures or is otherwise aversive to the controller. Counter control. Allows the client to access the reinforcers that have previously maintained the problem behavior. Alternative behaviors. When skills trained through behavioral skills training are tested in the natural environment to allow learners to contact contingencies described in training. In situ assessment. Behavior analysts are required to respect intellectual property laws by obtaining permission to use copyrighted or trademark materials and providing proper citations, attributions, or symbols, and refrain from unlawfully obtaining or disclosing proprietary information. Use of intellectual property. Performance feedback to supervisors by their supervisees related to supervision procedures. Upward evaluations. An assessment method that includes gathering information via direct observation and manipulation of stimuli, including single stimulus, paired stimulus, multiple stimulus without replacement, multiple stimulus with replacement, and free operant preference assessments. Direct preference assessment. Teach behaviors across multiple stimulus conditions. Train sufficient exemplars. Develop, improve, and maintain the behavioral analytic and ethical repertoires. Utilize behavioral case conceptualizations, problem solving, and support seeking by the supervisee. Enable high quality service delivery, improvements in client outcomes. Positive outcomes associated with evidence-based supervision. Straight horizontal line that represents passage of time. Horizontal axis. Use self-instruction, self-recording, setup cues, mediate, generalize. Initial assessment of supervisee skills is critical for establishing clear goals for supervision. Interview and direct observation serve as options for this initial assessment. These methods allow for an assessment of the supervisee's knowledge and ability to perform the procedures he or she will be responsible for in their job role. Supervisee initial assessment. A stimulus change that functions as a reinforcer and increases the frequency of behavior it proceeds as a result of evolutionary development. It does not rely on previous learning history. Primary unconditioned reinforcer. An observer who is unaware of the study's purpose and or experimental conditions in effect during a given phase or observation period. Naive observer. Skills are identified and sequenced. Definitions for these skills should be developed and mastery criteria identified. Supervisee goal setting. A behavioral effect associated with abrupt increases in ratio requirements when moving from denser to thinner reinforcement schedules. Ratio strain. Variety of techniques for gradually transferring stimulus control with a minimum of errors. Errorless learning. The environment in which something occurs. Setting. Provide clear guidelines for their members to follow when deciding a course of proper actions and conducting the professional duties. Ethical codes of behavior. Single words or brief descriptive phrases printed along the top of the graph and parallel to the horizontal axis. Condition label. Consolidates, updates, and replaces the former CBS professional disciplinary and ethical standards and guidelines for responsible conduct for behavior analysts. Compliance code. 2D graph that shows relative distribution of individual measures in a data set. Data points are not connected. Scatter plot. The ability to understand and share the feelings of others. Empathy. Experimental design, in which participants are presented with 2+ response options. Each option is associated with distinctive SD and leads to different sets of treatment procedures. Concurrent chains design. An assessment method that includes gathering information from familiar parties to determine what an individual might like. Indirect preference assessment. Vertical line drawn upward from the left-handed end of the horizontal axis. Vertical axis. Multiple component treatment package for reducing unwanted habits. Treatment typically includes self-awareness training involving response detection and procedures for identifying events that precede and trigger the response. Habit reversal. Terminal goal should reflect the reinforcement that matches the natural environment. Then reinforcement. State, provincial, or national government document that is established by law and specifies the privileges and limits of professional practice. License. Here is my graph to this point. I will graph today's data. I will take a picture and I will submit it with my video. Thank you.